Very punctual to your time, I see. Very glad indeed. Allow me the pleasure of receiving you here at Longbourn. The Bennets of Longbourn, eh? Anyway, come, pray allow me to make you acquainted with my daughters. Come on, Jane. Miss Jane Bennet.
The eldest, though I cannot see why she must always have the chair nearest the window.
Hush, dear. And the prettiest of all.
Mary, for goodness sake.
Next, Elizabeth.
Wittiest of all.
Though Captain Tally of the regiment expressed her to be the most critical young lady in Hertfordshire.
In the only complete sentence I ever heard him construct.
Blah.
And, book in hand, as always, Mary.
The proudest. Pride is a very common failing, I believe. By all that I have ever read, I am convinced that it's very common indeed, and that there are very few of us who do not cherish a feeling of self-complacency on the score of some quality or other, real or imaginary.
And last...
Vanity and pride are different things, though the words are often used synonymously. A person may be proud without being vain.
And...
Pride relates more to our opinion of ourselves, vanity to what we would have others think of us.
Yes, well, quite so. And last but not least, the two youngest, Kitty and Liddy.
Are we to be only the youngest? Have we no qualities? We are the best dancers with the prettiest heads, and sing most charmingly. Well, I do.
My dear Mr. Bennet.
Mrs. Bennet, to be sure.
My dear Mr. Bennet, have you not heard? Netherfield Park is let at last.
I've not.
But it is, for Mrs. Long has just been there and she told me all about it.
Probably an elderly bachelor with a King Charles Spaniel.
Indeed, Mr. Bennet, do not you want to know who has taken it?
Well, you want to tell me, and I have no objection to hearing.
Mrs. Long says it is a young man of large fortune. Really? That he came down on Monday and was so delighted with it that he is to take possession by Michaelmas.
Married or single?
We might first inquire the gentleman's name, Lydia.
Bingley.
But married or single?
Oh, single, my dears, to be sure. A single man of large fortune, 4,000 or 5,000 a year.
It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife.
However little known the feelings or views of such a man may be, this truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered the rightful property of someone or others of their daughters.
Oh dear.
Hush, Lizzie. What a fine thing for our girls.
How so?
That he might marry one of us, Papa.
Well, is that his design in settling here?
Design? Nonsense. But it is not unusual that a young man may fall in love.
Though he must be a soldier in a red regimental jacket.
You must visit him as soon as he comes.
I see no occasion for that. You and the girls may go. Or send them by themselves, which may be better still, because as you are as handsome as any of them, Mr. Bingley might like you the best of the party.
Well, I certainly may have my share of beauty. But when a woman has 5 grown-up daughters, she ought to give over ideas of her own attractions.
Yes, but in such cases, a woman often doesn't have much beauty to speak of.
Visit your daughters. What an establishment it will be for one of them. You must visit him, for it will be impossible for us to go if you do not.
You are over-scrupulous, surely. I will send by you a few lines assuring him of my hearty consent to his marrying whichever he wants.
Mr. Bennet, you take delight in vexing me. You have no compassion on my poor nerves.
My dear, I have high regard for your nerves. They're my old friends.
You do not know what I suffer.
No, but I hope you get over it. And live to see many young men of 4,000 a year come into the neighbourhood.
Well, it will be no use to us if 20 such should come, since you will not visit them.
Depend on it, my dear, when there are 20, I will visit them all.
Despite his protestations, Papa was among the earliest of those who waited on Mr. Bingley.
Capital, Lydia. I hope Mr. Bingley will like it.
We are not in a way to know what Mr. Bingley will like, seeing as we are not to visit.
It isn't fair, Papa, really it isn't.
You forget that we shall meet him at the assemblies, and that Mrs. Long has promised to introduce him.
I do not believe Mrs. Long will do any such thing. She has 2 nieces of her own.
And plain as cake, both of them.
She is a selfish, hypocritical woman, and I have no opinion of her.
Yes, but perhaps we might return to Mr. Bingley.
I say I am sick of Mr. Bingley.
My dear, why did you not tell me so before? If I had known as much this morning, I certainly wouldn't have called on him.
Called on him? Called on him? Oh, Papa!
Truly, Father?
Oh, girls, is he not an excellent father? But I knew I should persuade you at last.
Yes, and I fear as I've actually paid the visit, we can't escape his acquaintance now.
Come now, Darcy. I hate to see you standing about by yourself in such a stupid manner. We'd much better dance.
I certainly shall not. You know how I detest it unless I am particularly acquainted with my partner. Besides, apart from your sister, there's not a woman in the room whom it would not be a punishment to me to stand up with.
I would not be so fastidious as you are for a kingdom. I've never seen so many pleasant girls in my life, and several of them uncommonly pretty.
Your partner, the eldest Miss Bennet, is the only handsome girl in the room.
Indeed, the most beautiful creature I ever beheld. But there's one of her sisters, just there. I dare say it's very agreeable. Allow me to ask my partner to introduce you.
She is tolerable, I suppose, but that is insufficient to tempt me. Bingley, pray return to Miss Bennet. You're wasting your time.
He is just what a young man ought to be. Sensible, good-humoured, lively, and I never saw such happy manners, so much ease with such perfect good breeding.
He's also handsome, which a young man should be if he possibly can.
I can hardly explain to you the shocking rudeness of Mr. Darcy.
Well, how wise of you not to try?
I was very much flattered by his asking me to dance a second time. I did not expect such a compliment.
Did not you? Compliments always take you by surprise, and me, never.
I can assure you, Lizzie loses nothing by not suiting up Mr. Darcy's fancy, for he is a disagreeable, horrid man.
He's tall. Tolerably tall.
You're a great deal too apt to like people in general. You never see a fault in anybody. I swear, Jane, that I never heard you speak ill of a human being in my life.
I would not wish to be hasty in censoring anyone.
Oh, your Mr. Darcy is so high and mighty, there is no enduring him. Lizzie not handsome enough to dance with. I quite detest the man.
I always speak what I think.
With your good sense to be so honestly blind to the follies and nonsense of others.
Miss Bennet, might you care for a stroll about the room?
Within a short walk of Longbourn lived a family with whom we were particularly intimate.
Sir William Lucas, formerly in trade in Meryton, had made a tolerable fortune and risen to the honour of knighthood.
And gives 2 balls a season.
Oh, Lady Lucas was a very good woman and not too clever, which I find restful.
And their daughter Charlotte is my particular friend.
Occupied as you are in observing
Indeed. Where?
Aye, what more charming amusement for young people than a dance, eh? I consider it one of the first refinements of Polish societies.
Any savage can dance, sir.
Aye, wit, sir. Wit indeed.
Do you not notice that Mr. Darcy seems always in the fringes of your conversation?
Mrs. Long told me last night that he sat close to her for half an hour without once opening his lips.
Note him.
He has an extremely critical eye, and if I do not begin by being impertinent myself, I shall soon grow afraid of him. Did you not think, Mr. Darcy, that I expressed myself uncommonly well just now as I was teasing Colonel Forster to give us a ball at Meryton?
With great energy. But it is a subject which always makes a lady energetic.
My dear Eliza, why are you not dancing? Mr. Darcy, you can't refuse to dance, I'm sure, when you have such a beauty before you.
Indeed, sir, I have not the least intention of dancing. I entreat you not to suppose I move this way in order to beg for a partner.
May I have the honour of your hand for the next, Miss Bennet?
Mr. Darcy is all politeness, but I must deny myself the pleasure.
Mr. Darcy, I can guess the subject of your reverie.
I should imagine not.
You are considering how insupportable it would be to pass many evenings in such society. And indeed, I'm quite of your opinion.
Your conjecture is certainly wrong, I assure you.
Oh?
I have been meditating on the very great pleasure which a pair of fine eyes in the face of a pretty woman can bestow.
Truly? Pray tell me, what lady has the credit of inspiring such reflections?
Miss Elizabeth Bennet.
I confess I am all astonishment. How long has she been such a favourite, and pray when am I to wish you joy?
I expected as much. A lady's imagination is very rapid. It jumps from admiration to love to matrimony in a moment.
Nay, I shall consider the matter as absolutely settled. Indeed, you are a scamper of rogue, Sir William. You will make me laugh. You will have a charming mother-in-law indeed. You will have the pleasure of her always being at Pemberley with you.
Sister undoubtedly, but he may never do more than like her if she does not help him on.
But she does help him on, as much as her nature will allow.
Remember, Eliza, he does not know James' disposition as you do. She must make the most of every moment she can command his attention.
She takes time, I think, to study his character.
Well, I wish her success with all my heart. And if she married him tomorrow, I should think she had as good a chance of happiness as if she had studied his character for 12 months. It is better to know as little as possible of the defects of the person with whom you are to pass your life.
You make me laugh, Charlotte, but it's not sound, and you know full well you would never act in such a way yourself.
You are being watched.
Soon enough at Longbourn, Jane found herself in receipt of an invitation from...
My dear friend, if you would not be so compassionate as to dine today with me,
We shall be in danger of hating each other for the rest of our lives. Come as soon as you can on receipt of this. We shall dine with my brother, as well as other gentlemen and sundry officers.
yours ever,
Caroline Bingley. With the officers? Make it in Angles, Mama. We should like to meet sundry officers.
Aye. Was I mistaken, but there was one name on the invitation?
May I have the carriage, Father?
Indeed not. You had much better go on horseback, for the weather looks ill, and you might have the good fortune to be thoroughly soaked and stay longer with the Bingleys in ill health. lucky idea of mine indeed.
For you, Liz, you should never feel a thing.
My dearest Lizzie,
I find myself quite unwell this morning, which I suppose is to be imputed to my getting wet through yesterday. The Bingleys will not hear of my returning home until I am better.
only excepting a sore throat and a headache, there is not much the matter with me. Yours, Jane.
Well, my dear, if your daughter should suffer a dangerous fit of illness and die, it'll be comfort to know it was all in pursuit of Mr. Bingley, and all under your orders.
Nonsense. People do not die of little trifling colds. And the inconvenience, Mr. Bennet, is worth the price.
She feels ill and I will go to her.
Is that a hint for me to send for the horses?
No, the horses are wanted on the farm. I will walk. The distance is nothing when one has a motive. Only 3 miles.
You cannot go jumping over stiles and arrive with dirty stockings.
Jane at least will forgive me, Mother.
Ah, Mr. Bennet.
What?
Miss Bennet, how remarkably good of you to come.
A pleasure, of course, Mr. Bingley. You can imagine that my sister's letter gave me some cause for concern.
Of course. I shall take you to her.
Jane,
Lizzie,
you are flushed. Should you not be in bed?
We have sent for the apothecary. I would be most grateful, Miss Elizabeth, if you would remain at Netherfield until your sister is quite well.
yes, do stay.
I will dispatch a servant to acquaint your family and return with any necessities.
Mr. Bingley, I cannot attempt to thank you.
Any thanks are far beyond the occasion. Believe me, I have no pleasure in the world superior to that of yours.
Well,
He is most attentive.
indeed he is. You look quite drawn, Jane. One might say it serves you exactly for falling in with Mother's advice.
To walk 3 miles or 4 miles or 5 miles or whatever it is, over her ankles in mud and alone, quite alone, what could she mean by it? It seems to me to show an abominable sort of conceited independence and a complete indifference to decorum.
It shows an affection for her sister that is very pleasing.
I have an excessive regard for Jane Bennet, and I wish you were well settled, but with such a father and mother and such low connections, I'm afraid there's no chance of it. Their uncle is an attorney in Meryton and another lives somewhere in Cheapside.
Even if they had uncles enough to fill all of Cheapside, it would not make them one jot less agreeable. Ah, Miss Bennet, a pleasure. Your sister improves, I hope.
She's resting, but hopes not to be thought unsociable.
Indeed not. I find it singular and intriguing that you prefer reading to cards, Bennet.
Miss Elizabeth Bennet despises cards and has very little pleasure in anything else.
I deserve neither such praise nor such censure. I'm not a great reader, and I have pleasure in many things.
In nursing your sister you have pleasure, I'm sure.
Hear, hear.
Is Miss Darcy much grown since the spring? How I long to see your charming sister. Such manners and so accomplished for her age.
It is amazing to me how young ladies can have the patience to be so very accomplished as they all are.
All. My dear Charles, what do you mean?
Yes, Caroline, all. I've never heard of a young lady spoken of for the first time without being informed that she was very accomplished.
I fear I cannot boast of knowing more than a half dozen in the whole range of my acquaintance who are truly accomplished.
Then you must comprehend a great deal in your idea of an accomplished woman.
She must have a thorough knowledge of music, singing, drawing, dancing, languages, and a certain something in her air and manner. The tone of her voice, her address and expressions, or the word will be but half deserved.
And to all this she must get at something more substantial in the improvement of her mind by extensive reading.
I'm no longer surprised at your knowing only 6 accomplished women. I rather want to know at your knowing any.
I say. Sister, perhaps you would take to the pianoforte and favour us with a lively Scotch air?
Splendid. And perhaps Miss Bennet will then seize the opportunity to show us a fling. It's simple seeming, but difficult in the execution. Will you essay, Miss Bennet?
Oh, I heard you before. You wanted me, I know, to say yes, that you might have the pleasure of despising my taste, but I always delight in cheating a person of their premeditated consent. I've therefore made up my mind to tell you I do not want to dance a reel at all. And now despise me if you dare.
Terribly sorry, Darcy.
And is Mr. Darcy not to be laughed at?
The wisest and best of men may be rendered ridiculous by a person whose first object in life is a joke.
Certainly there are such people, but I hope I'm not one of them. I hope I never ridicule what is wise and good. Follies and nonsense, whims and inconsistencies do divert me, I own, and I laugh at them whenever I can. But these, I suppose, are precisely what you're without.
Perhaps that is not possible for anyone. But it has been the study of my life to avoid those weaknesses which so often expose a strong understanding to ridicule.
Such as vanity and pride.
Yes, vanity is a weakness indeed. But pride, where there's a real superiority of mind, pride will be always under good regulation. I have faults enough, Miss Bennet, but they're not, I hope, of understanding. My temper I dare not vouch for. It is, I believe, too little yielding, perhaps resentful. My good opinion, once lost, is lost forever.
That is a failing indeed, but you've chosen your fault well. I really cannot laugh at it. Take for me.
There is, I believe, in every disposition a tendency to some particular evil, a natural defect which even the best education cannot overcome.
And your defect is a propensity to hate everybody.
And yours is willfully to misunderstand.
On Sunday, the carriage was sent and Jane and Elizabeth returned home. Mamma, fear was not very cordial to them.
I cannot for the life of me see, Elizabeth, why you had to rush Jane home.
I wasn't rushed, Mamma.
Well, I, for one, am gratified. I mean, our evening conversation had lost much of its animation and almost all its sense.
Oh, Mr. Bennet.
Oh, pooh.
My dear, I hope you've ordered a good dinner today. I have reason to expect an addition to the family party.
Oh, is it Mr. Bingley? Why, Jane, you never said a word, you sly thing.
It's not Mr. Bingley. It's my cousin, Mr. Collins, who, when I am dead, may turn you all out of this house as soon as he pleases.
Why, Papa?
It is the entail, Kitty. The entail about which I often remind you. The inheritance of my property is limited to male heirs, and I, having produced none, my cousin Mr. Collins has become the legal recipient. Now,
Pray do not talk of that odious man and this odious legality. It is monstrous that your estate should be tailed away from your own children.
Mr. Collins was punctual to his time.
Mrs. Bennet. Mr. Bennet, as a pastor of the Church of England, I flatter myself that my present overtures of goodwill are highly commendable, and that the circumstances of my being next in the entail of the Longbourn estate will be kindly overlooked on your part and not lead you to reject my proffered olive branch. As for your daughters, I have heard much about their beauty, but in the instance, fame has fallen short to the truth. And I doubt not seeing them, as I might say, to be well disposed of in marriage.
Oh, you are very kind, sir. And with all my heart, I wish it shall be so, for else they will be destitute enough.
I am very sensible, madam, of the hardship of my fair cousins, but I can assure the young ladies that I come prepared to admire them. At present, I will say nothing more, but perhaps when we are better acquainted. Come on. Thus, in conclusion of having a good house and a good living as a clergyman, I intend to marry. And in reconciliation with your family, I propose to choose one of your daughters. Surely you will agree that this atonement is an excellent one, both generous and disinterested on my part.
Indeed.
I very much approve your eldest.
Jane.
Indeed, I conceive her both fetching and decorous. She should do quite nicely, and seniority must be said.
Jane, sir, as to my younger daughters, I cannot but take it upon myself to say I know of no predisposition. As to my eldest daughter,
Jane.
Jane, I feel it incumbent to say she may be very soon engaged.
Ah, I see. And the next in age?
Elizabeth.
Elizabeth, yes. Very forthright and not at all unpresentable.
Done.
To escape Mr. Collins' lectures,
On the high quality and the moral fitness of the pastorate of the Church of England,
Papa suggested a stroll to Meryton.
I suppose I'm better fitted for a walker than a talker.
Indeed! One must first learn that the highest laws for the governance of a Christian duty.
He soon espied. Oh, yoo-hoo! A newly arrived officer of the regiment. Yoo-hoo! Of most gentlemanlike appearance who was introduced to us.
by an officer already of our acquaintance as Mr. Wickham.
How do you do? This is a lucky chance indeed. At the officers' table, the Bennets much spoken of, and all of it approbation. Miss Catherine and Miss Lydia, are you not? The wrong way round.
Quite topsy-turvy.
Profoundly sorry. I hope to be correct in addressing you as Miss Elizabeth Bennet.
Yes, quite correct.
I solicit your further acquaintance, Miss Bennet.
Our society, sir, is not extensive. I venture we will meet again.
La, we were talking oh so very agreeably when the sound of horses drew our notice.
And Mr. Bingley and Darcy came riding by.
Mr. Wickham barely touched his hat, which Mr. Darcy hardly deigned to return.
What could be the meaning of it? Before walking on, we naturally enjoined Mr. Wickham to pay us a visit.
With very great pleasure indeed. I fear we poor souls in the army lack greatly in feminine instruction. Miss Elizabeth.
La, but our sisters made a conquest.
Lydia,
I am very fortunate in my patroness, the non-parade Lady Catherine de Bourgh, who has condescended to take me in hand. Ah, what beauty, what elevated style and affability. She is, of course, the proprietress of Rosings and of very extensive property. Her daughter's in different health unhappily prevents her being in town, which, as I told Lady Catherine myself one day, has deprived the British court of its brightest ornament.
Oh, absolutely splendid.
Mr. Wickham has arrived. Mr. George Wickham, Papa. Please.
Delighted.
Parson Collins, Mr. Wickham.
Oh, what was it? Pleasure to meet a gentleman of the cloth. I had a near miss myself.
I have more than once observed to Lady Catherine de Bourgh that her charming daughter is born to be a duchess, but to be brief.
Mr. Wickham suggested that I show him around the grounds.
Please excuse my temerity in accepting your sister's kind invitation with an almost unbecoming alacrity.
It's a great kindness to seek us out. The regiment, I hope, is not unhappily quartered here.
I cannot speak for the regiment, but I may say I am personally improved by acquaintance with your family.
A courtesy very prettily put.
And sincerely meant.
I could not help noticing, sir, a certain coolness of regard passing between yourself and Mr. Darcy.
You have a keen eye, Miss Bennet.
And a curious one, sir.
Might you tell me how far Netherfield is from Meryton?
3 miles, perhaps?
Indeed. Has Mr. Darcy been staying there long?
About a month. He's a man of very large property in Derbyshire, I understand.
His estate there is a noble one. In fact, I have been connected with his family from my infancy. Are you much acquainted with him?
I've spent 4 days in the same house with him, and I find him very disagreeable.
I believe your opinion of him would in general astonish.
Really? It's not at all like in Hertfordshire.
May I express surprise? The world is perhaps blinded by his fortune and consequence and sees him only as he chooses to be seen.
I should take him even on my slight acquaintance to be an ill-tempered man.
I fear I have considerable knowledge of him. The late Mr. Darcy, his father, was excessively attached to me. I cannot do justice to his kindness. His son and I were born in the same parish, sharing the same amusements. My father was his father's estate manager. The elder Mr. Darcy knew that the church ought to be my profession, and he offered me the family parish when it became available, or, if not, a voluntary promise of providing for me. Both were countermanded by young Darcy after his father's death.
On what grounds?
Had the late Mr. Darcy liked me less, perhaps his son might have borne with me better, but his father's uncommon attachment to me irritated him. He had not a temper to bear the sort of competition in which we stood. In short, his behaviour to me has been scandalous. But I do not trust myself on the subject. I can hardly be fair to him now.
I had not thought Mr. Darcy as bad as this.
I believe most of his actions may be traced to his considerable pride.
But can such abominable pride as his have ever done him good?
I must own him to be liberal and generous, display hospitality, aid his tenants and relieve the poor. Family pride and filial pride have done this. His father's preference to me has pricked that pride and made him my enemy.
I'm astonished at his intimacy with Mr. Bingley. Do you know him?
Not at all.
He's a sweet-tempered, amiable, charming man. He cannot know what Mr. Darcy is.
Mr. Darcy can please where he chooses. He does not want abilities.
My judgment would be that he deserves to be publicly disgraced.
Some day or other he shall be, but it won't be by me. Miss Bennet, allow me to say that the troubling aspect of our subject has not made you a whit less delightful.
I must suppose the relationship you have described will not allow your presence at the coming ball at Netherfield.
I should fear a discomfort for all involved, but make no mistake, Miss Bennet, I keenly feel the loss.
Well, whatever he said was well said, and whatever he did was done gracefully.
But, dear sister, I am all astonishment and concern. I know not how to believe Mr. Darcy could be so unworthy of Mr. Bingley's regard.
I can much more easily believe Mr. Bingley's being imposed on than Mr. Darcy should invent such a history of himself.
But it is so distressing. One does not know what to think.
I beg your pardon, one knows exactly what you think.
I know only with certainty that poor Mr. Bingley would have much to suffer if Wickham's charge becomes public.
Poor Mr. Bingley.
I speak only as an observer.
Back at home, Mr. Bingley and his sister gave their invitation for the long-expected ball at Netherfield, which was fixed for the following Tuesday.
May I hope for the next, Miss Bennet?
Well, I hardly
Do
think...
not be a simpleton and allow your fancy for Wigham to make you appear unpleasant in the eyes of a man of 10 times his consequence.
Well then.
The music is well played, do you not think? It's your turn to say something now, Mr. Darcy. I talked about the dance, and you ought to make some kind of remark on the size of the room, or the number of couples.
I quite assure you that whatever you wish me to say will be said.
Very well, that reply will do for the present. Now remain silent.
Do you talk by the rule then, when you're dancing?
I've always, Mr. Darcy, seen a great similarity in the turn of our minds. We each have an unsocial, taciturn disposition, unwilling to speak unless we expect to say something that will amaze the whole room and be handed down to posterity with all the eclat of proverb.
This is no very striking resemblance of your own character, I'm sure. How near it may be to mine, I cannot pretend to say.
I've recently had the pleasure of forming a new acquaintance with a childhood friend of yours, Mr. Wickham.
Mr. Wickham is blessed with such happy manners as to ensure his making friends. Whether he may be equally capable of retaining them is less certain.
He's been so unlucky as to lose your friendship, and in a manner which he's likely to suffer from all his life.
What think your books, Miss Elizabeth?
I cannot talk of books in a ballroom. My head's full of something else.
Ah,
I remember hearing you say, Mr. Darcy, that you hardly ever forgave that your resentment once created was unappeasable. You are very cautious, I suppose, as to its being created,
I am.
and never allow yourself to be blinded by prejudice.
May I ask what these questions tend?
Merely to the illustration of your character. I'm trying to make it out.
And what is your success?
I do not get on at all. I hear such different accounts of you as to puzzle me exceedingly.
I can readily believe that reports vary very greatly with respect to me. And I could wish, Miss Bennet, that you would not sketch my character at present, as there's reason to fear that the performance would reflect no credit on either.
Ah, Mr. Darcy, you are, if I'm not mistaken, the nephew of my eminent patroness, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, who secured for me the living at Holmeswood Parsonage. Thus allow me to observe that I consider the clerical officers equal in point of dignity with the highest rank in the kingdom, provided that the
You have
company...
neglected your name, sir.
Have I?
You have.
Mr. Collins.
Delighted.
Excellent. Very excellent. I have no reason, I assure you, to be dissatisfied with my reception. He answered me with the utmost civility, and upon the whole, I am much pleased with him.
Though he neglected his name.
Did he?
So, Miss Eliza, I hear you're quite delighted with George Wickham. Yes, your sister Jane's been talking with me. Did you know that he was the son of the late Mr. Darcy's steward?
I believe he so asserted.
Let me recommend you, however, as a friend, not to give implicit confidence to all of his assertions. As to Mr. Darcy's using him ill, it's perfectly false, for, on the contrary, he has always been remarkably kind to him.
Oh, well.
George Wickham, on the other hand, has treated Mr. Darcy in the most infamous manner. I do not know the particulars, but his returning to the country at all is the most insolent thing. Though, considering his descent, one could not expect much better.
His guilt and his descent appear by your account to be one and the same. I've heard you accuse him of nothing worse than of being the son of Mr. Darcy's steward. And for that I can assure you he informed himself.
I beg your pardon. Please excuse my interference. It was kindly meant.
Insolent girl.
By heavens, you stepped it wonderfully.
Under your instructions, sir.
Well, that at least promises the felicity which a marriage of true affection can bestow.
When at last the guests and officers quitted the house, Mamma spoke all the way home of preparations, new carriages, wedding clothes, and seeing Jane settled in Netherfield within 3 months. Oh, and Mr. Collins' marriage to Elizabeth as well.
May I hope, madam, for your interest in the matter of your penultimate eldest, Elizabeth? For I solicit the honour of a private audience with her in the course of this morning.
What? Oh, yes, Jimmy, a private audience. I see the drift. Yes, I'm sure Lizzie will be very happy. I'm sure she can have no objection. A private audience. Come, Kitty, I want you upstairs.
Dear madam, do not go.
Not go?
Mr. Collins must excuse me. He can have nothing to say to me that anybody need not hear. I'm going away myself.
Lizzie, I insist upon you staying and hearing Mr. Collins. Come, Kitty.
Your Majesty adds only to your other perfections, for my attentions have been too marked to be mistaken. But before I'm run away with by my feelings, I shall enumerate the reasons for marrying. First, to set the example of matrimony in my parish. Secondly, that it greatly adds to a man's well-being. And thirdly, by the particular advice and the recommendation of Lady Catherine Berg, my esteemed patroness, your wit and vivacity, I think, must be acceptable to her, especially in tempering with the silence and respect in which her rank invariably excites. Fourth, as I am to inherit this lovely estate after the death of your honored father, I feel bound to choose a wife from among his daughters, so that the loss to them might be as little as possible. Now nothing remains for me but to assure you in the most animated language of the violence of my affection. To fortune, I'm perfectly indifferent, and as to dowry, I am well aware of your father's finances. And you may assure yourself, dear cousin, that no ungenerous reproach shall ever pass my lips once we are married.
No!
No?
I'm very sensible of the honor of your proposals, but it's impossible for me to do otherwise than decline them.
It is usual for young ladies to reject at the first addresses of the man they secretly mean to accept.
I do assure you, I am not one of those young ladies. You could not make me happy, and I'm convinced I'm the last woman in the world who would make you so. Were your friend Lady Catherine to know me, she would find me in every respect ill-qualified. This matter may be considered, therefore, as finally settled.
Naturally, you cannot be serious in your rejection of me. Good sense and financial necessity forbid it. It is your wish to increase my love by suspense according to the usual practice of elegant females.
I am not, Mr. Collins, an elegant female intending to plague you. I'm a rational creature speaking the truth from her heart. I will not have you. Can I speak plainer?
You are uniformly charming.
My dear Mr. Collins, may I be the first to congratulate you?
She has been on delightfully with a refusal.
A refusal?
Out of bashful modesty and genuine delicacy to her character.
Mr. Bennet, you are wanted immediately.
She is a foolish, headstrong girl and does not know her own interests.
Headstrong?
But I will make her know it.
Headstrong? Foolish? Oh, dear me. If so, for better not to force her acceptance, because if liable to such defects of temper, she could not contribute much to my felicity.
Mr. Bennet, you must come and make Lizzie marry Mr. Collins, for she vows she will not have him.
Pray excuse me.
I've not the pleasure of understanding you.
And now Mr. Collins begins to say he will not have Lizzie. Lizzie!
And what am I to do on the occasion?
Well, tell her you insist upon her marrying him.
Come here, child. Is it true Mr. Collins has made you an offer of marriage?
It is.
And this offer of marriage you have refused?
I have, sir.
An unhappy alternative is before you, Elizabeth. Mrs. Bennet will never see you again if you do not marry Mr. Collins. And I will never see you again if you do.
I tell you what, Miss Lizzie, go on in this way and you will never get a husband at all. And I'm sure I do not know who is to maintain you when your father is dead. Oh, Mr. Collins.
Please excuse me, but I wish to withdraw my pretensions against your daughter's favour. I have come to feel that her high spirits may not find a perfect expressions in the somewhat circumscribed life of the parsonage. I am resigned, but I hope improved. Resignation is never so perfect as when the blessings denied begins to lose its value in our estimation.
Lizzie, I shall simply say that I shall never speak to you again, and you will find me as good as my word. I have no pleasure in speaking to undutiful children.
Jane, this has come from Netherfield. From Netherfield? Caroline Bingley says their entire party is leaving for town tomorrow without any intention of coming back again.
I do not pretend to regret anything I shall leave in Hertfordshire, except your society, my dearest friend. It is evident by this Mr. Bingley comes back no more this winter.
It's only evident that Miss Bingley does not mean he should.
I will read you the passage which particularly hurts me. I will have no reserves from you. Mr. Darcy is impatient to see his younger sister, and to confess the truth, we are scarcely less eager to meet her again. Georgiana has no equal for beauty, elegance, and accomplishments, and we dare entertain the hope of her being hereafter our sister.
Foolishness. She's a child.
Is it not clear enough? Does it not expressly declare that Caroline neither expects nor wishes me to be her sister, and that she's perfectly indifferent of her brother's indifference to me? Can there be any other opinion on the subject?
Yes, there can, for mine is totally different. Will you hear it?
Most willingly.
Oh, yes.
It is this. Miss Bingley sees that her brother is in love with you and wants him to marry Georgiana Darcy. I also suspect Mr. Bingley's regard was further suppressed by his friend Mr. Darcy's interference. He watched you most narrowly as you danced.
You must not criticise, Lizzie. Perhaps I've imagined Mr. Bingley's regard. Women fancy admiration means more than it does.
And men take care that it should. His sister has influenced him as well, Jane, in conjunction with his friend.
Surely she only wishes his happiness.
Oh, she may wish many things besides his happiness, such as an increase in wealth, consequence, and great connections.
No, Lizzie. I think no ill of him or his sister. Let me take it in the best light, in the light in which it may be understood. I have at least the comfort that it has not been more than an error of fancy on my side, and that it has done no harm to anyone but myself.
Really, you are too good. You wish to think all the world respectable. The more I see of the world, the more I'm dissatisfied with it, and every day confirms my belief in the inconsistency of all human characters. I've come to distrust the appearance of either merit or sense.
You must not hinder your happiness on my behalf.
So, Lizzie, your sister's crossed in love, I find. I congratulate her. I mean, next to being married, a young girl likes to be crossed in love a little now and then. You will hardly bear be long outdone by Jane. Here are officers enough at Meryton to disappoint every single woman in the country. Let Wickham be a man. He's a pleasant fellow, and he would jilt you creditably.
Thank you, sir, but a less agreeable man would satisfy me. You must not all expect Jane's good fortune.
Amazement! Within the very week and in as short a time as Mr. Collins' long speeches would allow, all was settled between him and Charlotte Lucas by way of
Domestic arrangement.
and Lizzie feels she accepted him solely from,
The pure disinterested desire of an establishment.
and as Mamma said,
Care not how that establishment was gained.
Charlotte's marriage is unaccountable. In every view, unaccountable.
My dear Lizzie, do not give way to feelings such as these. They will ruin your happiness.
Engaged to Mr. Collins, my dear Charlotte, impossible.
Why should you be so surprised, my dear Eliza? Do you think it incredible that Mr. Collins should be able to procure any woman's good opinion, because he was not so happy as to succeed with you?
Indeed not, but... It's 2 offers of marriage in 3 days?
Dear Eliza, I'm sure when you've had time to think it all over that you will be satisfied for me. I'm not a romantic, you know. I never was. You must come and visit the parsonage as soon as ever you can.
I tell you, Mr. Collins has been taken in. Worse still, Lizzie, I am sure, is the cause of all of the mischief.
No.
I tell you, we are in a pitiable state. Because of the entail, Charlotte Lucas will be mistress of this house, and I will be forced to make way for her and live to see her take my place in it.
Well, let us hope for better things. Let us flatter ourselves that I might be the survivor.
In our gloom, Mr. Wickham's society was of material service, and his betrayal by Mr. Darcy was general knowledge. We all agreed that
Mr. Darcy was the worst of men. On the following Monday, the Gardners, my mother's brother and his wife, arrived. He is a sensible, gentlemanlike man, and Mrs. Gardner has always illumined the premises by distributing presents, describing the newest fashions, and giving us sage advice.
A young man such as you described, Mr. Bingley, so easily falls in love with a pretty girl for a few weeks and just as easily forgets her. Now, as to Mr. Wickham, whom you mention far too frequently, I should have you be on your guard.
Oh, he shall not be in love with me if I can prevent it.
Do not involve yourself in an affection which his want of fortune should make very imprudent.
At present I am not in love with Mr. Wickham, but I count him as the most agreeable man I ever saw.
Unwise.
But how can I be wiser than so many of my fellow creatures if I'm tempted? Or how am I even to know it would be wisdom to resist? All I can promise you, therefore, is not to be in a hurry.
I say no more. I shall take Jane with me to London, poor girl. The change of scene might be of service. Should better have happened to you, Lizzie. You would have laughed yourself out of it sooner. I understand you're to visit the Collinses in their newly married state, and you must visit me as well.
As March was to take me to Hunsford Parsonage, the improvement of spending a night in London made the plan perfect as planned could be.
Jane. Lizzie, come sit with me.
Now, is London as agreeable to you?
I confess myself to have been entirely deceived in Miss Bingley's regard for me. She has barely visited me here in London, and when she did come, it was very evident she had no pleasure in it. In fact, she seemed to have come only to convince me of her brother's interest in Miss Darcy.
All gentlemen are held in my lowest repute. It is said that Mr. Wickham is now the admirer of a certain Miss King.
Oh.
And her most remarkable charm, I might add, seems to be the acquisition of £10,000 through family mortality. And I think it is indecent of him to approach her so soon after this event. You look pale, Elizabeth. Are you ill?
A man in distressed circumstances has not the time for the elegant decorums which others might observe. If she does not object to it, why should we?
Her not objecting to it does not justify him.
I have a very poor opinion of young men who live in Hertfordshire, and their intimate friends who live in Derbyshire are not much better. I'm sick of them all. Thank heaven I'm going tomorrow to Collins's parsonage, where I shall find a man who has not one agreeable quality, who has neither manners nor sense to recommend him. Perhaps stupid men are the only ones worth knowing after all.
Bravo. You must accompany Mr. Gardner and I on a tour of pleasure this summer where we shall avoid the sex altogether and regard the landscape.
My dear aunt, what delight, what felicity. You give me fresh life and vigour. Adieu to disappointment and spleen. What are men to rocks and mountains? Every object in my next day's journey was new and interesting. At length the parsonage was discernible, and Mr. Collins and Charlotte appeared at the gate.
Dearest Eliza, you're welcome and then welcome again. Come in immediately, you must be wearied and jostled.
I have news about Lady Catherine's delicate consideration and civility in inviting us to dine at Rosings in the next night. Do not make yourself uneasy, dear cousin, about your apparel. Lady Catherine will not think the worst of you for being simply dressed.
Do not be surprised that Mr. Darcy will be in attendance, bringing with him a Colonel Fitzwilliam, the youngest son of his uncle.
It is my pleasure to introduce the right and honourable Lady Catherine de Bourgh, whose wit, affability and condescension makes her the admired ornament of...
Yes, quite so. You are, I believe, Elizabeth Bennet.
Yes.
And your father's estate is entailed on Mr. Collins, I think. Well, for your sake, I'm glad of it, but otherwise I see no occasion for entailing estates from the female line. A word, Collins.
Miss Bennet, I've not hoped to see you here.
Nor I.
Allow me to present Colonel Fitzwilliam.
Your beauty of reported exceeds, Miss Bennet.
This has not been true, Colonel Fitzwilliam, in all quarters.
Miss Bennet, your family.
My family.
How many sisters have you, Miss Bennet?
I have 4 sisters.
That is a great many. Are you the eldest?
I'm the second.
And are they handsome?
Indeed.
And do your sisters play and sing? Do you draw?
No, not at all.
What, none of you? It's very strange. Has your governess left you?
We never had a governess.
No governess? How is that possible? 5 daughters brought up at home without a governess. I've never heard of such a thing. Your mother must have been quite a slave to your education.
Not perhaps as you might think.
Then who taught you? Who attended to you?
Such of us as wished to learn never wanted the means. We were always encouraged to read and books were always provided. Such of us as wished to learn never wanted the means.
I no doubt. That is what a governess will prevent. Had I known your mother, I'd advise her most strenuously to engage one. Are any of your younger sisters out?
Yes, Ma'am. All.
All? All 5 at once? The younger one's out before the eldest are married.
But really, Ma'am, I think it would be very hard upon younger sisters that they should not have their share of society and amusement because the elder may not have the means or inclination to marry early.
Upon my word, you give your opinion very decidedly for so young a person. Pray, what is your age?
With 3 younger sisters grown up, your ladyship can hardly expect me to own it.
What is that you're saying, Fitzwilliam? What are you telling Miss Bennet?
We're speaking of music, madam.
Of music. And pray, speak aloud.
Well, I'm reminding Miss Bennet of her earlier promise to favor us at the pianoforte.
Ah, yes. Pray excuse me. I fear you will not find me a great proficient. Please continue your conversation rather than attend me.
I often tell young ladies that no excellence in music is to be acquired without constant practice.
You mean to frighten me, Mr. Darcy? My courage always rises with every attempt to intimidate me.
You could not really believe me to entertain any design of alarming you. I've had the pleasure of your acquaintance long enough to know that you find great enjoyment in occasionally professing opinions which in fact are not your own.
Your cousin will give you a very pretty notion of me and teach you not to believe a word I say. Take care, sir, for you're provoking me to retaliate, and such things may come out as will shock your relations to hear.
I'm not afraid of you.
Pray let me hear what you accuse him of. I should like to know how such a paragon behaves among strangers.
You shall hear then, but prepare for something very dreadful. The first time of my ever meeting him was at a ball, and he refused to dance, and more than one young lady was sitting down who wanted a partner.
Darcy.
I had not at the time the honour of knowing any lady in the assembly, and I'm ill qualified to recommend myself to strangers.
Shall we ask him why a man of sense and education who has lived in the world is ill qualified to recommend himself to strangers?
I have not the talent for conversing easily with those I've never seen before.
Well, fortunately for all present, that is not the case here. Strangely and unexpectedly after our delightful evening at Lady Catherine de Bourgh's, the 2 cousins came often of an afternoon to the parsonage. It was plain that Colonel Fitzwilliam came because he took pleasure in Charlotte's and my society. But why Mr. Darcy came so often was more difficult to understand.
If you will not laugh me to scorn, Eliza, I might suggest the possibility of his being partial to you.
The gentleman seldom meets my eyes and often sits there 10 minutes together without opening his lips.
Ah, but he often looks at you quite appraisingly when your look is engaged elsewhere.
Stuff. I'm going for a ramble in the park.
Ah, Miss Bennet.
Colonel Fitzwilliam, I did not know you ever walked this way.
Are you going much further?
No, I should have turned in a moment. Do you certainly leave Kent on Saturday?
Yes. Darcy does not put it off again.
I do not know anyone who seems to enjoy the power of doing what he likes more than Mr. Darcy.
But so do we all. It's only that he has the better means of having it than many others, and I'm at his disposal.
I guess your cousin brought you down with him for the sake of having somebody at his disposal. I wonder he does not marry to secure lasting convenience of that kind. But perhaps his sister does as well for the present, as she's under his sole care.
In fact, I'm joined with him in the guardianship of Miss Darcy.
Really? Young ladies her age are sometimes a little difficult to manage. And if she has true Darcy spirit, she may like to have her own way.
On the contrary, she's one of the most tractable creatures in the world. And a great favourite of Miss Bingley. I think I've heard you say you know her.
A little. Darcy is uncommonly kind to Mr. Bingley and takes a prodigious deal of care of him.
From something Darcy said, I have reason to think Bingley very much indebted to him. It is a circumstance of which Darcy, of course, could not wish to be generally known. As if it were to get around to the lady's family, it would be an unpleasant thing.
You may, of course, depend on my not mentioning it.
Well, he merely mentioned that he had congratulated himself on having lately saved a friend from the inconvenience of a most imprudent marriage. Now, I only suspected it to be Bingley, as his open nature might get him into a scrape of that sort.
Please pardon me, but I do not see what right Mr. Darcy had to decide on the propriety of a friend's inclination.
Well, as I recall, there were some very strong objections to the lady's family. I believe one was a country attorney and another with some sort of mercantile background. Perhaps even an unsuitable mother. Well, this is really all conjecture, so good day to you, Miss Bennet.
To Jane herself, there could be no possibility of objection. All loveliness and goodness as she is. Neither could anything be urged against my father, who, with some peculiarities, has abilities Mr. Darcy himself need not disdain. Of course, my mother. But Mr. Darcy would receive a deeper wound from the want of importance in his friends' connections than from their want of sense. He's been governed by this worst kind of pride, and partly from the wish of retaining Mr. Bingley for his sister.
Miss Bennet?
Mr. Darcy?
May I inquire of your health?
My health?
Yes. As I have not encountered you in these past few days, I thought that I have come to inquire of your health.
My health, Mr. Darcy, meets all the usual standards.
Ah.
Yes.
Ah. In vain have I struggled. It will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you. I see it as me. I am slow, even dilatory. I should have declared myself at an earlier date, but there were, of course, the family obstacles which judgment always opposed to inclination. The general sense of your social inferiority, there'd been a degradation of the line. I could not forget my responsibility to an estate, a way of life, a pride of place which might, given your circumstances, disinclude you. And thus, the very ardency I described took place against my will and reason, or rather in opposition to my character and inclination. But the very strength of my attachment has made it impossible for me to conquer these feelings, and I can now only express the hope that these feelings will be rewarded by your acceptance of my hand. There. I have spoken ill, but I mean well, Miss Bennet.
In such cases as this, It is, I believe. The established mode to express a certain obligation for the sentiments avowed, however unequally they may be returned. It's natural that obligation should be felt, and if I could feel gratitude, I would now thank you. But I cannot. I have never desired your good opinion, and you have certainly bestowed it most unwillingly. The feelings which you tell me have long prevented the acknowledgement of your regard, can have little difficulty in overcoming it after this explanation.
And this is all the reply which I am to have the honour of expecting. I might perhaps wish to be informed why, with so little endeavour at civility, I am thus rejected.
I might as well inquire why. With so evident a design of offending and insulting me, you chose to tell me you like me. Against your will, against your reason, and even against your character. Was this not some excuse for incivility if I wasn't civil? But I have other provocations, you know I have. Do you think any consideration would tempt me to accept the man who has been the means of ruining perhaps forever the happiness of a beloved sister? You divided Mr. Bingley and Jane from each other, or at least yours was the principal means, involving them both in misery of the acutest kind. Can you deny that you've done it?
I have no wish to deny that I did everything in my power to separate my friend from your sister, or that I rejoice in my success. Towards him I've been kinder than towards myself.
Quite clearly said. But it's not merely in this affair which my dislike is founded. Your character was unfolded in the recital which I received many months ago from Mr. Wickham.
You take an eager interest in that gentleman's concerns.
Knowing his misfortunes, you would not feel an interest in him, and of your infliction. You have withheld the advantages which you must have known to have been designed for him, yet you treat the mention of his misfortunes with contempt.
And this is your opinion of me? I thank you for explaining it so fully. These bitter accusations might have been suppressed had I, with greater policy, flattered you into the belief of my being impelled by unqualified, unalloyed inclination. But disguise of every sort is my abhorrence.
The mode of your declaration has not affected me, Mr. Darcy. You could not have made me the offer of your hand in any possible way that would have tempted me to accept it. From the very beginning, your arrogance and selfish disdain towards the feelings of others have built an immovable dislike. You are, Mr. Darcy, the last man in the world whom I could ever be prevailed on to marry.
You have said quite enough, madam. I perfectly comprehend your feelings. Forgive me for having taken up so much of your time, and accept my best wishes for your health and happiness.
Next morning I awoke to the same thoughts that had kept sleep long at bay, and resolved to see what air and exercise might do for my meditations. Thus proceeded to my favourite walk.
Well, I have been wandering the grove for some time in the hope of meeting you. Will you do me the honour of reading this letter?
Two offences you last night laid to my charge. First, that I had detached Mr. Bingley from your sister, and the other, that I had in defiance of honour blasted the prospects of Mr. Wickham.
Ah, Miss Bennet, you're well known in Hertfordshire.
I had not been long in Hertfordshire.
Will you think me too forward if I apply to you for a second chance?
Before I observed my friend's behaviour and perceived his most surprising partiality.
Your sister I also watched.
And though her manners were open and engaging, I saw no symptom of warm regard or sentiment. She received his attentions, but remained to my eye indifferent.
My objections to the marriage proceeded also from other causes of repugnance. Your family's want of propriety betrayed by your mother's manners, your younger sister's forwardness, and even, forgive me, your father's misplaced wit, all confirmed my sense
That I must preserve my friend from a most unhappy connection.
In London, I found his sister's uneasiness,
Has been greatly excited.
and we were alike sensible that no time should be lost in detaching him.
Bingley has great natural modesty, with a stronger dependence on my judgment than on his own.
To convince him that he had deceived himself was not difficult. On this subject I have nothing more to say, and no apology to offer. With respect to that other, more weighty accusation of having injured Mr. Wickham, that I will attempt to refute.
In short, his behaviour to me has been scandalous.
My father was not only fond of the young man's society, but hoped the church would be his profession.
And intended to provide for him in it. He would situate him at the family parsonage, where he would receive a legacy of £1,000. On my father's death, Mr. Wickham wrote to inform me that.
I have resolved not to pursue a church living, but to study law, for which the £1,000 would be insufficient. I hope you don't think it unreasonable of me to expect more immediate pecuniary advantage.
The business was soon settled. He resigned all claim to assistance in the church.
And accepted in return £3,000. 3 years later he applied to me again, having found the law an unprofitable study, and being then again resolved to be ordained.
Last summer he again most painfully obtruded on my notice. My sister Georgiana, for whom Mr. Fitzwilliam and I were mutual guardians, was taken from school at her wish and established in London. Mr. Wickham by connivance recommended himself to her.
Ah, Miss Darcy, a pleasure to renew your acquaintance.
She was then but 15 and was persuaded to believe herself in love and consented to an elopement.
Fortunately, regarding me as almost a second father, she confessed her plans to me.
You may imagine what I felt and how I acted.
I wrote to Mr. Wickham in undisguised heat, and he left London immediately, and alone. His chief object had unquestionably been my sister's fortune of £30,000, and the hope, I think, of revenging himself on me.
His attentions to Miss King seem now the consequence of you solely and hatefully mercenary.
This, madam, is a faithful narrative of every event. If your abhorrence of me should make my assertions valueless, I direct you to Colonel Fitzwilliam, also guardian of Georgiana, who is fully aware of every particular described above. I will only add, God bless you.
How humiliating is this discovery. Yet, how just a humiliation. Had I been in love, I could not have been more wretchedly blind, but vanity, not love, has been my folly. As to the mention of my family in terms so mortifying, my sense of shame is severe, but the charge strikes too forcibly for denial. Their defect, I fear, seems hopeless of remedy. My mother puts herself forward beyond all expectation, while my father does nothing to restrain the uncontrollable giddiness and self-willed carelessness of my younger sisters. Only excepting dear Jane, what can I call them all but ignorant, idle, and vain? How despicably I have acted! I, who have prided myself on my discernment. Till this moment, I never knew myself.
I'm glad you're back, Lizzie.
Have you had any flirting? I was in great hopes you would have got a husband before you got back.
Our sisters have been more than ordinarily silly.
Oh, pooh. Aunt Philip says Lizzie had better take in Mr. Collins, but I do not think there would have been any fun in it. Jane will be quite an old maid soon. Lord, how I should like to be married before any of you, and then I should chaperone you about to all the balls. Kitty and I have been to the shops. Oh, Mary, I do wish you had gone along with us, but we had such fun. We talked and laughed so loud that anyone could have heard us 10 miles off.
Far be it from me, my dear sister, to depreciate such pleasures, but I confess they would have no charms for me. I should infinitely prefer a book.
Look here, I bought this bonnet. I do not think it's very pretty, but I thought I might as well buy it as not.
You see.
Sister, I'm heartily sorry that Mr. Darcy should have delivered his sentiments in a manner so little suited to recommend them. But I grieve for the unhappiness your refusal must have given him.
You do not blame me, however, for refusing him.
Blame you? Oh no, but Wickham's so very bad. It is almost past belief. How unfortunate you should have used such very strong expressions in speaking of Wickham to Mr. Darcy, for now they do appear wholly undeserved.
Well, Lizzie, what think you now of this business of Jane's?
Well, I believe
He is a very undeserving young man, and I do not believe she will ever get him now.
Mother.
Well, my comfort is she will die of a broken heart, and then he will will be sorry for what he's done. News! Ecstatic, delicious, wonderful news!
Hearing the regiment should leave for Brighton. I thought my heart should have broken.
My Holland line!
But oh, Mama, I received an invitation from Mrs. Forster, the wife of the colonel of the regiment, to accompany her to
Brighton! To Brighton!
And I can see no reason why I should not be invited as well.
Shall?
You confuse your steps to the dance Espanol, and you've but one dress for this season, and that an unsuitable green.
Lydia will never be easy until she's exposed her qualities at some public place or other, and we can never expect her to do it with so little expense or inconvenience to her family under the present circumstances.
Oh, Papa.
Were you aware of the very great disadvantage to us all which must arise from Lydia's ungardened and imprudent manner, and which has already arisen from it?
Oh, what, has she frightened away some of your lovers?
I have no such injuries to resent, but, dear father, if there is no check to exuberant spirit, she will soon be on the reach of amendment.
Oh, pooh.
Yes, pooh. And Kitty will follow wherever Lydia leads.
Papa has said I may. Indeed, a visit to Brighton comprises every possibility of earthly happiness.
Well, you may play the common flirt with at least 6 officers at once.
I tell you all, I shan't dine or ever leave my room.
We will have no peace at Longbourn if Lydia does not go to Brighton!
Mr. Wickham has arrived to say his goodbyes as the regiment have already camped for Brighton.
But Mr. Wickham, I will not say my goodbyes, for Papa has agreed I may accept Mrs. Forster's invitation for an extended visit.
Well, it would be my pleasure, if asked, to introduce you at Brighton and share the town's historical views. Miss Bennett.
Mr. Wickham.
Am I in disgrace, Miss Bennett?
I do not rightly understand you.
I've always admired your understanding.
Did I mention I met Colonel Fitzwilliam and Mr. Darcy at Rosings? You know Colonel Fitzwilliam, I believe.
In passing. You saw Mr. Darcy frequently?
Yes, almost every day. I believe Mr. Darcy improves on acquaintance.
Indeed. Is it in address he improves, for I dare not hope he has improved in essentials?
I mean that from knowing him better, his disposition was better understood.
I must rejoice that he is wise enough to assume even the appearance of what is right, for it must deter him from such foul misconduct as I have suffered by. But I fear I must leave you. We are on the march. A last word on Mr. Darcy. His manners being in a state of improvement may be imputed to his wish of forwarding with his new affability a match to the daughter of Lady Catherine de Bourgh. A match long contemplated by both sides of the family as a boon to the growth of their estates and a continuance of their honourable lines. Good day, Miss Bennett. I do not think we will meet again. I wish you good fortune in whichever way your inclinations lie.
The departure of the regiment, including many acquaintances, wrapped a cloak of gloom and disinclination around our domestic circle, and my constant hope of a tour to the lake with the gardeners was now the object of my happiest thoughts.
My dear Elizabeth, our plans, due to Mr. Gardner's business, must be somewhat curtailed in extent. You must give up the lakes and substitute a more contracted tour. Had you set your heart upon seeing the lakes?
Well, I own their one attraction.
I fear we're confined to Derbyshire, though it leaves us with the delights of Warwick, Kenilworth, Lambton, and of course, Pemberley.
Pemberley?
Yes, the Darcy estate.
Yes, I recall.
If it were merely a fine house richly furnished, I should not care about it myself, but the grounds are delightful.
The grounds, yes. But, dear aunt, is the family not down for the summer?
Indeed not, you goose, for they summer always in London. Elizabeth.
The journey was for scenery splendid, and when we turned in at the lodge, we saw that Pemberley Park was large.
Good day, Squire, on the right of ground.
Glorious woods.
Pardon?
Woods!
You're straight for fishing.
The house sits well on rising ground. I own I've never seen natural beauty so little contradicted by an awkward taste.
Whoa there, Alexander.
You are very well. The master is of course absent, but we expect him tomorrow with a large party of friends. Now, we are instructed always to show the house, if you would like.
Most kind indeed.
Your master, much at Pamberley, is he?
Oh, not so much as I could wish, sir.
We should look at this tree, eh?
Please step in. That above the grand fireplace would be my master. Grown perhaps 8 years ago.
Handsome face, but Lizzie, can you tell us whether it is like or not?
Oh, does the young lady know Mr. Darcy?
I do, yes.
Aye. But do you not find him a handsome gentleman, ma'am?
Yes. Very handsome.
He is the best master as I've ever lived. I've never had a cross word from him in my life.
Mr. Darcy, you mean?
Yes, ma'am. Now, you go as you like and see what you please.
In what an amiable light does this place him, though not quite consistent with his behaviour to our poor friend.
It is possible we are deceived. Perhaps, Aunt, we may view the grounds?
With the greatest pleasure. Indeed, the landscape, the lawn, the river, all in harmony with the buildings are quite swept away.
Oh!
Ah,
Miss Bennet. This is a most welcome surprise.
Yes.
May I inquire of your health? That of your family?
In all regards, well.
I'm very pleased to hear so. Will you do me the honour of introducing me to your friends?
Mr. and Mrs. Gardner, may I present Mr. Darcy?
charmed.
Delighted.
My uncle and aunt.
That, of course, only adds to the honour.
Wonderful stream, Mr. Darcy. Capital angling, I suspect.
Quite satisfactory, Mr. Gardner. Should you continue in the neighbourhood, please do me the pleasure of fishing here as often as you choose. I can easily provide you with requisite tackle and direct you to those parts of the stream where there's usually most sport.
Pardon?
Best sport, sir?
Most kind indeed, looking forward to it.
Very generous indeed.
Please accept our forwardness in walking the grounds. Your housekeeper informed us you would certainly not be here until tomorrow.
I have preceded my party to arrange for their comforts. Among them are some who will claim acquaintance with you. Mr. Bingley and his sister. And another whom more particularly wishes to be known to you. Will you allow me, or do I ask too much, to introduce my sister to your acquaintance during your stay at Lambton?
I am delighted by this compliment.
Ah.
Greatest pleasure.
Perfectly well behaved. Polite and unassuming.
Yes, there is something a little aloof in him. To be sure, Lizzie, he is not handsome, but his features are perfectly good. How came you to tell us he was so disagreeable?
Well,
Pardon?
Disagreeable, dear.
Indeed not, and runs the bit whimsical of his civilities.
Thus, dearest Jane, in speaking of your supposed rival, Miss Darcy, I saw no looks between her and Mr. Bingley that spoke of particular regard. He also asked me with great interest if all my sisters were still at Longbourn, which I took as an inquiry as to your married state. Miss Bingley continues in her dislike of me. Georgiana Darcy was greatly civil, but very shy.
something come for you, miss. Something come. I thought you might be wanting it.
News from Jane, and very welcome.
Brought it here then. Brought it here. Brought it here.
My dearest Lizzie, something has occurred of a most serious and unexpected nature.
Colonel Forrest has informed us that Lydia has run off to Scotland with one of his officers. To own the truth, Lizzie, it is with Wickham.
Worse still.
Imprudence as a marriage between Wickham and our poor Lydia would be.
We are now frantic to be assured it has taken place.
is reason to believe
That he never intended to marry Lydia at all.
and Colonel Forrester
Believes Wickham is not a man to be trusted.
Father is going to London with Colonel Forrester to try to discover her, and what he shall do I know not.
He shall shoot the scoundrel through the heart and we shall all be ruined.
Adieu, I cannot help earnestly begging you
To come as soon as possible. Oh, where is my aunt? I must find her this moment of business. I cannot be delayed.
Good God, what is the matter?
Oh, I have not an instant to lose.
Let me send a servant. Or a glass of wine. Shall I get you one?
Most kind, but
You're very ill.
only dreadful news. My sister has left all her friends and has eloped under the power of Mr. Wickham. You know him too well to doubt the rest. She is lost forever.
I'm grieved. You're shocked. But is it absolutely certain?
Certain. My father has gone to London, and I'm sure Mr. Gardner will assist, but how is such a man to be worked on? How are they even to be discovered?
If there's anything I can...
No,
Would to heaven that something could be done or said on my part that might offer consolation to such distress.
pray apologize first to Miss Darcy. We must go.
Dear me, your company seems to have fled the grounds in disarray.
Your pardon?
How very ill Eliza Bennet looked this morning, Mr. Darcy. Never in my life have I seen anyone as altered as she since the winter. She has grown so brown and coarse.
Yes. It is perhaps no miraculous consequence of travelling in the summer.
I remember you saying one night, she a beauty. I should as soon call her mother a wit. But afterwards she seemed to improve on you. I believe you thought her rather pretty at one time.
Yes. But that was only when I first knew her. I now consider her the handsomest woman of my acquaintance.
I never perceived while the regiment was in Hertfordshire that Lydia had any partiality for Wickham, but she only wanted encouragement to attach herself to anybody. The mischief of neglect and mistaken indulgence towards such a girl. Oh, her family so deranged, a father absent, a mother incapable of exertion, and it's all my fault that knowing what I did at Wickham that I had not the foresight to make that knowledge public. Has anything been heard of the fugitives?
Not yet, but now my dear uncle has come, I hope all will be well.
Is father in London?
Yes, he went on Tuesday.
Well, if I had been able to carry my point in taking all of the family to Brighton, then this would never have happened. Oh, but why did the Forsters let her out of their sight?
Mother.
Oh, and now, Mr. Bennet will fight Wickham wherever he meets him, and I do not know what we shall do.
Pardon?
Not know what we shall do.
Not give way to useless alarm. I shall go to London, call my brother, consult together, and see what is to be done.
This is a most unfortunate affair, but we must stem the tide of malice and pour into the wounded bosoms of each other the balm of sisterly consolation.
You see, Mary thinks it's all a book.
My poor father, how he must have felt it.
I've never seen anyone so shocked. He could not speak a word.
Mr. Bennet shocked? Well, I was taken ill immediately. Indeed, I had to be carried to my room twice. Father, Mr. Bennet, dear Mr. Bennet.
My dear father, what you must have endured.
It's my own doing. I ought to feel it kicked off.
Let's not be too severe upon yourself.
No, Lizzie, for once in my life, let us feel how much I am to blame. Or perhaps I'll defer it till Kitty runs away.
I'm not going to run away, Father. If I should ever go to Brighton, I would behave far better than Lydia.
Do you suppose them to be in London?
Yes. Where else could they be so well concealed?
Father?
What?
Oh. Gardner in London.
Oh.
Indeed, I have palpitations.
I have seen them both.
Thank heaven.
They are not married, nor can I find there is any intention of being so.
Oh, water!
However, I hope it is not long before they are.
You see, not long. She is a good girl, not long.
Hush, Mrs. Bennet.
All that is required of you is to assure your daughter by settlement her equal share of the £5,000 secured among your children after your decease.
And enter into an engagement of allowing her, during your life, £100 per annum.
Is it possible? Is it possible he will marry her?
So Wickham is not so undeserving as we have thought him.
But the terms, I suppose, must be complied with.
Exactly. You must write on the moment, Mr. Bennet. They must marry.
And right, I will. But there are two things I want very much to know. How much money your uncle has laid down to bring it about? And how am I ever to pay him?
Money? My uncle? What do you mean, sir?
I mean that no man in his senses would marry Lydia for 100 a year during my life and 50 when I'm gone. Wickham's a fool if he takes her for a farthing less than £10,000.
And Mr. Gardiner could pay such a sum.
Indeed he could not, nor I repay.
You must write, Mr. Bennet. Inscribe this minute. This is delightful indeed. She will be married, and I will see her again. Oh, my good, kind brother. Oh, I long to see Lydia and dear Wickham, too.
Dear Wickham.
But the clothes, the wedding clothes, we must see to it. But I will make all of the arrangements myself. Bring the bell, Kitty, we must have the carriage. Oh, how merry we shall be when we are together again. Calico, muslin, cambric, I'll manage it all.
Mr. Gardiner wrote that Wickham had resolved on quitting the militia, but would enter the regular army, and under the command of General Trott, now quartered in the north.
After our sister's wedding day, the couple returned to Longbourn.
And the family assembled to receive them.
Congratulate me, sisters. It's a great while since I've been here. Good gracious, when I went away, I'm sure I had no idea of being married, though I thought it would be very good fun if I was. Dear Jane, I must take your place now, and you must go lower because I am a married woman. And what do you think of my husband? Is he not a charming man? All my sisters must go to Brighton now, as that is the place to get husbands.
I thank you for my share of the favour, but I do not particularly like your way of getting husbands.
Ah, you're so strange. But I must tell you how it went off. We were married, you know, at St. Clement's, because Wickham's lodgings were in that parish, and it was settled that we should all be there by 11 o'clock. Well, just as the carriage came to the door, my uncle was called away on business, and I was so frightened that the wedding must needs be put off. But then I recollected Mr. Darcy would do as well to give me away.
Mr. Darcy?
Give you away?
Oh yes, he was to come there with Wickham, you know. But gracious me, I quite forgot. I ought not to have said a word. It was to be such a secret.
If it was to be secret, say not another word.
Most certainly, we will ask you no questions.
Indeed, for then I should tell all, and Wickham would be so angry.
Lydia!
Coming, Mama!
But are my suspicions concerning Mr. Darcy's actions correct?
Lizzie, really, if you're to be so innocent and ignorant, I'm to be more explicit.
Oh dear.
Mr. Darcy called to tell Mr. Gardiner he had found out where Wickham and your sister were. Mr. Darcy professed that it was owing to himself that Wickham's worthlessness was not well known. He called it his duty to step forward and remedy the evil caused.
But not brought on by himself.
Lydia? Lydia, indeed. He called on her and found her resolved on remaining.
Lydia would be Lydia still.
Mr. Darcy asked why Wickham would not marry your sister at once.
Because we are not rich.
Indeed, Wickham still cherished the hope of making his fortune through marriage in another country. And then Mr. Darcy settled upon him a large sum for his reluctant acceptance, and made Mr. Gardiner acquainted.
I knew it.
Lizzie, where are you going?
To speak with father.
This must not go, Lizzie, any further than yourself or Jane at the most. Mr. Darcy does not want the act nor the sum known.
But you have told me.
I have, yes.
Miss Elizabeth, I fear I interrupt your solitary ramble.
You do? Yes. But it does not mean the interruption must be unwelcome.
I should be sorry indeed if it were. I hear from your aunt you have seen Pemberley. You saw the old housekeeper, I suppose.
I did.
What did she say?
That you had gone into the army and was afraid had not turned out well.
I see. Did Darcy introduce you to his sister?
He did.
Do you like her?
Very much.
I hope she will turn out well.
I dare say she will. She has got over the most trying age.
You think ill of me, do you not, Miss Elizabeth?
I'm very glad you have married my sister, Mr. Wickham. How should you have liked making sermons?
Exceedingly well, but it was not to be. I will leave you with your thoughts.
Come, Mr. Wickham. We are brother and sister, you know. Let us not quarrel about the past. In the future, I hope we shall always be of one mind.
Your generous spirit, sister.
He's a finer fellow as ever I saw. He simpers and smirks and makes love to us all.
I often think there is nothing so bad as parting with friends. One seems so forlorn without them.
That is the consequence, madam, of marrying a daughter. You must make it better satisfied that the other four are single.
Mr. Bingley is coming down, Mamma.
Wonderful news! I mean, he is nothing to us, and I'm sure I never want to see him again. But he is welcome at Netherfield. And who knows what might happen.
I can assure you the news does not affect me with either pleasure or pain.
But if he wants our society, let him seek it. He knows where we live.
But you will wait on him, of course.
I'm not going to spend my hours running after neighbours every time they go away and come back again.
I begin to worry he comes at all. I could see him with a perfect indifference, but I can hardly bear to hear it thus perpetually talked of. My mother means well, but she does not know. No one can know how much I suffer from what she says.
I wish I could say anything to comfort you, but it's wholly out of my power.
Mr. Bingley has entered the paddock and is riding towards the house.
Do you contradict yourself with a smile of expectation?
Let me first see how he behaves. It will then be early enough for expectation.
And there is a gentleman with him, Mamma.
Oh, some acquaintance or other, my dear, I'm sure I do not know.
La, it looks just like that Mr. What was his name? That tall, proud man.
Good gracious, Mr. Darcy! And so it does, I vow. Well, any friend of Mr. Bingley's will always be welcome here, to be sure. Else I must say I hate the very sight of him.
Mr. Darcy.
The gentleman will receive with tolerable ease, and a propriety of behaviour I thought equally free from any symptom of resentment or any unnecessary complacence.
Mr. Bingley, it seems a very long time since you went away.
Good gracious, yes. Far too long in my own opinion.
I began to be afraid you would never be coming back again.
Bennett.
Miss Lucas is married and settled, and one of my own daughters.
A matter for the greatest congratulations.
It is a delightful thing indeed to have a daughter well settled. Mr. Wickham has taken her to Newcastle with his regiment, a place too far northward, in my opinion.
Indeed. Excellent shooting this season. Hey, Darcy.
Mr. Bingley, when you have killed all of your own birds, I beg that you come here and kill all of ours. You are a visiting bandit, you know. When you went to town last winter, you promised to have a family dinner with us upon your return. I have not forgot, you see. I was very disappointed that you did not come back and keep your engagement.
to be remedied at the very first opportunity. Hey, Darcy.
You have been quite silent, Mr. Darcy. I hope you are well.
Quite well. Very well.
And then they went away.
Why, if Darcy came only to be silent, grave, and indifferent, did he come at all?
Now that this first meeting is over, I feel perfectly easy. Obviously on both sides we met only as common and indifferent acquaintance.
Oh, Jane, take care.
My dear Lizzie, you cannot think me so weak as to be in danger now.
I think you're in very great danger of making him as much in love with you as ever. A man who has been once refused. How could I ever be foolish enough to expect a renewal of his love? Is there one among the sex who would not protest against such a weakness as a second proposal to the same woman? There is no indignity so abhorrent to their feelings.
Mr. Bingley called again on Friday.
Having once said on this road to happiness, there was nothing on the side of prudence to stop him in his progress.
He called again the following Tuesday.
She was, of course, only too good for him, but as no one minds having what is too good for them, he was very earnest in pursuit of the blessing.
And yet again, Thursday a week.
I begin to think there is something in this, Jane.
And it was not possible that encouragement from Jane should be long wanting.
Mr. Bingley has come, Mamma, and he looks very serious.
Oh. Mr. Bingley, what a memorable surprise.
What's the matter, Mamma? What did you winking at me for?
I did not wink at you. Come, Mary, come, Kitty. I want to talk to you upstairs.
Mr. Bingley, you ride excellently. Welcome back to London.
Elizabeth, I very much wish to consult you as to the... Well, I want to talk to you.
My dearest Miss Bennet, I say, might I venture your given name?
Indeed you might. If I might venture yours.
Smash it! Top of the hill! My dearest Jane, I must express how very great is my esteem for you.
I see.
Oh, by heavens, esteem won't do. I must say affection. I really must. Dear Miss Bennet. Jane. You would do me the honor of...
I will, and with a very full heart. But perhaps before a fuller expression, you might prefer a word with my father?
Your father! Yes! No mistaking! I shall speak with him. This very moment, if available. Promise me you won't move as much as a whip.
I will endeavour to be very, very still. Oh dear! Lizzie!
Lizzie, what?
It's too much! By far too much! I do not deserve it! Oh, why is everybody not as happy? A catch! A veritable catch! I'm ecstatic! Oh.
You are a good girl. I've not a doubt of you two doing well together. You're each of you so complying, nothing will ever be resolved. So easy, every servant will cheat you. So generous, you'll always exceed your income.
Exceed their income, Mr. Bennet. What are you talking of? Why, they had 4,000 or 5,000 a year, and very likely more.
Oh, Lizzie, why am I thus singled out from my family and blessed above them all? If I could but
see you as happy.
If you were to give me 40 such men, I could never be so happy as you. No, let me shift for myself, and if I'm lucky, I might meet with another Mr. Collins in time.
Indeed.
Mamma, I have no notion how to proceed. It is Lady Catherine de Bourgh come to call.
No.
Yes.
I'm astonished beyond all expectation.
I've shown myself in.
You are very welcome, Lady Catherine.
So I hope you are well. That lady, I suppose, is your mother.
Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, may I present Lady Catherine de Bourgh?
Yes, madam. My youngest daughter is lately married, and
This must be a most inconvenient sitting room for the evening in summer. Your windows are full west.
indeed, we never sit here after dinner.
Miss Bennet, there seems to be a prettyish kind of little wilderness on one side of your room. I should be glad to take a turn in it, if you would favour me with your company. You can be at no loss, Miss Bennet, to understand the reason for my journey hither.
Indeed, you're mistaken. I cannot account for the honour.
But however insincere you may choose to be, you will not find me so. My character has ever been celebrated for its sincerity and its frankness. I was told that not only was your sister at the point of being most advantageously married, but that you, in all likelihood, would be united with my very own nephew, Mr. Darcy. And though I know this to be a scandalous falsehood, I've arrived to make my sentiments clear to you.
If you believed it untrue, I wonder you took the trouble of coming so far.
To have the report universally contradicted. Can you declare there is no foundation to it?
Your ladyship may ask questions which I shall not choose to answer.
This is not to be borne.
Your ladyship has declared it impossible.
Your arts and allurements may, in a moment of infatuation, make him forget what he owes to himself and to all his family. You may have drawn him in.
If I have, I should be the last person to confess it.
Miss Bennet, I am unaccustomed to such language as this. I am entitled to know all his dearest concerns.
But you're not entitled to know mine.
Mr. Darcy's engaged to my daughter. Now, what have you to say?
Thus you have no reason to suspect he would make an offer to me.
From his earliest hours, his mother and I have planned the union, and he is destined for his cousin.
But what is that to me? If there is no other objection to my marrying your nephew, I shall certainly not be kept from it by knowing his mother and aunt wanted him to marry Miss de Bourgh.
Honour! Decorum! Prudence! Nay, interest forbid it. Your alliance will be a disgrace. You have neither family connections nor fortune, and your name will never be mentioned by any of us.
These are heavy misfortunes, but the wife of Mr. Darcy will have no cause to repine.
Obstinate, headstrong girl! I've not been in the habit of brooking disappointment.
That will make your ladyship's situation more pitiable, but it will have no effect.
Tell me once and for all, are you engaged to him?
I am not.
And will you promise me not to enter into such an engagement?
I will make no promise of the kind. I must beg, therefore, to be importuned no farther on the
Oh, my-
subject.
Not so easy. To the objections I have already urged, I have another one to add. I'm no stranger to the particulars of your youngest sister's infamous elopement. A patched-up business at the expense of your father and uncle.
I must ask.
Is such a girl to be my nephew's sister? Is her husband, who is the son of his late father's steward, to be his brother? Oh, heaven on earth, of what are you thinking? Are the shades of Pemberley to be thus polluted?
You have insulted me in every possible method. I must beg to return to the house.
You are resolved to ruin him, in the opinion of all his friends, and make him the contempt of the world, against the claims of duty, honour, and gratitude.
Neither duty, honour, nor gratitude has any possible claim on me in the present instance. And with regard to the resentment of his family, or the indignation of the world, if the former were excited by his marrying me, it would not give me one moment's concern, and the rest of the world would have too much
Very
sense.
well, very well. Very well. I shall now know how to act. Do not imagine, Miss Bennet, that your ambitions will ever be gratified. I take no leave of you, Miss Bennet. I send no compliments to your mother. I am most seriously displeased.
But Lady Catherine not come in again and rest herself?
Oh, she chose not to. She would go.
She is a fine-looking woman and prodigiously civil. I suppose she only came to tell us the Collinses were well. I suppose she had nothing particular to say to you, Lizzie.
Oh, no, nothing particular.
Lizzie, I've received a letter this morning that has astonished me. I didn't know I had 2 daughters on the brink of matrimony. It's from Mr. Collins.
Mr. Collins.
Your daughter, Elizabeth, you, it is presumed, will not long bear the name Bennet after her eldest sister has resigned it.
And a chosen partner of her fate may be reasonably looked up to as one of the most illustrious personages in this land.
Can you possibly guess, Lizzie, who is meant by this? Mr. Darcy is the man. Oh, Lizzie, now I think I've surprised you. Oh, is it not rich? Are you not diverted? Oh, come on, Lizzie, looks like you didn't enjoy it. Could you not laugh at the idle report of a country parson? For what do we live but to make sport for our neighbours and laugh at them in our turn?
I am excessively diverted, but it is so strange.
Yes, that's what makes it so amusing. His perfect indifference and your pointed dislike make it so wonderfully absurd.
Mr. Darcy is here, and most expressly to see you, Lizzie.
Miss Bennet?
Mr. Darcy? Mr. Darcy, I am a very selfish creature, and for the sake of giving relief to my own feelings, cannot how much I may be wounding yours. I can no longer help thanking you for what you did to my poor sister, who had known to the rest of my family, and which I've not merely my own gratitude to express.
I'm sorry, exceedingly sorry, that you have been informed of what may mistakenly have given you uneasiness. I did not think Mrs. Gardiner was so little to be trusted.
Please do not blame my aunt. Lydia's thoughtlessness first betrayed to me your involvement. Let me thank you again and again.
If you will thank me, then let it be for yourself alone. Your family owes me nothing. Much as I respect them, I believe I thought only of you. So, indeed. You're too generous to trifle with me. If your feelings are still what they were last April, tell me so at once. My affections and wishes are unchanged. But one word from you will silence me. Forever.
Mr. Darcy. Mr. Darcy, my feelings have undergone so material a change since the time you allude as to make me receive with gratitude your
Present assurances.
Exactly.
I am...
You are?
Yes, very much so. I believe my aunt has been to see you.
She has.
As you may know, my feelings are exactly contrariwise. I hope you spoke to her quite frankly.
Yes. You know enough of my frankness to believe me capable of that. After abusing you so abominably to your face, I could have no scruple in abusing you to all your relations.
What did you say of me that I did not deserve? My previous behavior to you has merited the severest reproof. It was unpardonable.
The conduct of neither, if strictly examined, will be reproachable. But since then, I hope we have both improved in civility.
As a child, I was taught what was right, but I was not taught to correct my temper. I was given good principles, but left to follow them only in pride and conceit. By you, I was properly humbled. I came to you without a doubt of my reception, and you assured me how insufficient were all my pretensions to please a woman worthy of being pleased.
I'm almost afraid of asking you what you thought of me when we met at Pemberley. You blame me for coming?
I felt only the pleasure of surprise. My object then was to show you by every civility in my power that your reproofs had been attended to. How soon after any other wishes introduced themselves I can hardly tell, but I believe in about half an hour after I'd seen you.
Other wishes?
Other wishes, yes.
And Mr. Bingley?
On the evening before my going to London, I told him all that had occurred to make my former interference in his affairs absurd and impertinent. I told him moreover that I believed myself mistaken in supposing your sister's indifference to him, and that I could easily perceive that his attachment to her was unabated. I felt no doubt of their happiness together.
Did you speak from your own observation or merely from my information last spring?
I had narrowly observed her, and I was convinced of her affection.
And what do you narrowly observe in me, Mr. Darcy?
That something, I'm not sure what, is expected. What have I done?
Please pardon me. You have not yet learned to be laughed at, but it was rather too early to begin.
Pray excuse me, I must speak to your father.
I have given him my consent. And now, I'm giving it to you, if you are resolved to have it. But I know your disposition, Lizzie. You will be neither happy nor respectable unless you truly esteemed your husband. Your lively talents would place you in the greatest danger in an unequal marriage. You could scarcely escape discredit and misery.
I do esteem him, Father. He's grown exceedingly in my estimation, and his own affection is not the work of a day, but has stood the test of many months' suspense. He is the object of my choice.
This is an evening of wonders indeed!
Good gracious. God bless me. Only think, Mr. Darcy. Who would have thought it? And is it really true? Oh, my sweetest, how great and rich you will be. What jewels and carriages you will have. Jane is nothing to it, nothing at all. 3 daughters married. £10,000. I shall go distracted.
Now I am quite happy, for you will be as happy as myself. Were it for nothing but his love of you, I must always have esteemed him. But now, as Bingley's friend and your husband, there can only be Bingley and yourself more dear to me. Go, go!
And now, Mr. Darcy, pray continue.